Yesterday, we started looking at the Homo genus, right? Humans, where humans came from. And then we eventually kind of pivoted to classification. What is a classification? What does it mean, for it to be part of the Homo genus, for example? And we eventually looked into all the different types of domains and kingdoms and so on and so forth. Now, we had come up with a little bit of an acronym to remember the order of those. Which one is more broad and which one's more specific? Does anyone remember that acronym? Thank you. I've been looking at that. Oh, whoops. That's not right. Sorry, my stuff is going on the wrong screen. Give me 1 second. Slideshow. There we go. So we looked at these acronyms, right? The first letter of each of these, as we go more broad to more specific, domains most broad, then kingdom, phylum, class, order, etc. You can remember that by dumb kids playing catch on the freeways. Sorry, dumb kids playing catch on freeways get squished. It's a mouthful, right? But it's an easier way to remember the order of this because I'm pretty confident you guys know what this stuff is. The issue always is crap, is class or order more broad or more specific? I don't remember. That's always the part that we struggle with this. So this dumb kids playing catch on the freeways thing is a good way to do that. You only have to have that in your memory for 6 days, okay? Just put it in your brain for 6 days and you can get rid of it and you're good to go. Anyways, long story short, yesterday we looked at the categories. We looked at what is a category, what's a characteristics, and we looked at how we group things and the difference between the kingdoms and the domains specifically. So we are going to finish off everything today. We're going to finish off all the stuff we've learned with, here we go. We're going to finish off all the stuff we've learned with the person who threw this guy's plans. If you're still writing that down, I can go back to that in a second. With the person who threw this guy's plans into disorder. Linnaeus had that really good system, right? That's the system we use right now. But Linnaeus is super, super old. He didn't account for one thing that we now know is, a factor, evolution. Life has evolved for hundreds of millions of years. And this is a system that was static. It looked only at the present day, not at what the past is. What if stuff evolves in the future as well? So it didn't look about those things, which is where we're kind of focused on today. And sorry, did you need to write that down? Oh, you're good? Okay. So we're going to start looking at Darwin. Does anyone know what Darwin is famous for? You will have heard of it. Darwin's theory of evolution and natural selection. So we have evolution and natural selection. These are two things. He is saying things evolve through natural selection. So what are these two? You probably have a really good concept of them already. The difference between these two. This would be helpful. Yeah. Okay. And this. Okay, so Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection. Okay, so he's introducing two ideas here. I really want to make that distinct. A lot of people lump them in. They are two ideas. They are just connected, is the big part here. So you probably know what evolution is, right? Things have evolved over time. You probably know what natural selection is. Think about giraffes. How come they have such really tall necks, right? Well, because the food was higher up in the trees. Next, the giraffes with taller necks were more able to get more food. So they eventually, the ones who couldn't reach the food died naturally. So nature selected the giraffes with taller necks to survive. They've evolved eventually to have long necks. So you might have heard about his trip. So where did he come with this? So Darwin began his journey here, and he basically just took a giant boat ride. So he started in England here. So basically, and I really want you to kind of like really think about this here. So he did this in 1840. So 180 years ago, this dude went on a ship from England and literally sailed around the world. Literally sailed around the world. That's wild, right? So here's what he discovered on this trip. So as he was going along, specifically in the South American coast here, he keeps going to islands and all these regions. And he notices some things. So he went on this just to collect samples. All he was going to do was just collect some samples and like give them to some rich king or something. But while he's there, specifically at the Galapagos Islands, he notices some stuff. He notices, so the Galapagos Islands are a bunch of different islands, all in a really compact region. So he goes from island to island to island to island to island. They're all in a relatively close region though. And he notices that on each of these islands, they have similar animals, birds specifically, but they're slightly different. How come they have slightly different birds? They are so close together. Every specimen he collected was new. We've never seen these before. Even though, here's the Galapagos Islands, even though here's South America over here, we've been to South America for like 100 and 200 years by now. How come we haven't seen this stuff before? So these species, they were similar to the species, sorry. So he starts collecting these samples and he notices some slight differences here. So eventually what he kind of comes up with an idea, like, how come they're so different? Maybe they're different because there were some changes in their ancestral species. If you remember the ancestral species, right? There's the old ones here and then it branches out. So what he thinks is maybe we could change, maybe we humans could change other species through what we call artificial selection. So if I can breed animals to produce certain offspring with desired traits. So we know this exists. This exists. This is dogs, right? You guys remember those pictures of the dogs I showed you from 100 years ago to now? They look different. Think about a pug. A pug looks way different. We did artificial selection. We were purposely breeding animals with specific traits. So we've introduced the third topic. We have natural selection, artificial. Natural selection, it happens in nature. And artificial selection, this is humans doing it on purpose, right? Like I'm taking a dog with a short nose and I'm gonna breed with another dog with a short nose. I'm intentionally doing that. They didn't come to each other naturally in nature. So that's artificial selection. Well, maybe nature does the same thing. Maybe some competitors are better equipped for survival. Giraffes with tall necks might be better equipped for survival, for example, than ones with shorter necks. Maybe you think about cheetahs, maybe the faster cheetahs, that speed is more helpful than the slower ones. So it's a beneficial trait. So if the faster cheetahs are able to get food, the slower cheetahs are not, the slower ones die, right? So what am I left with? I'm now left with a pack of fast cheetahs. I'm now left with a pack of tall-necked giraffes. If we think about bugs, we've all seen bugs that can camouflage, right? Maybe, and that could just be random. Think about like a moth wing here. Let me draw a little moth. I'm not a great artist, but sure, we'll go with that. Think about a moth and like imagine it's on a tree trunk, right? What do you think is most likely to survive? If there's a bird that's trying to eat right now, if it's on a tree trunk, a brown tree trunk, if the moth is brown or the moth is orange, the brown one's going to live, right? So ones with a more neutral color, a more camouflage color, are more equipped to survive than the ones that are not. So this is what eventually leads to where most insects kind of blend into their environment. Has anyone ever gone to a zoo and seen like a poisonous snake or something? They're usually pretty colorful, right? And that they evolved to have that as a warning symbol. Like, don't eat meat, because you know if you see the color like yellow on a snake, that means it's poisonous, and so on and so forth. So here's our four primary things. How do you know it's natural selection? We get variation, we get change. Like, so things are a little bit different. And those variations over time are heritable. I can pass it on. If I have two giraffes that survived with long necks, they breed, they have a bunch of offspring, then those offspring have long necks, it's heritable. So now I've introduced more of those giraffe kids, which grow up to have taller necks. They are more apt to survive in. So if we repeat this over many, many years, eventually there's going to be a lot more tall neck giraffes than short neck giraffes. It goes from generation to generation. I might start out with just one. So if we think about the parent generation, maybe I just have one giraffe with a really tall neck. But the second generation, F1, maybe now I get two of them that can do it. The next generation, maybe now I have 4. The next generation, maybe now I have 8. You can see how over a long period of time, that preferable trait, it is good that a giraffe has long necks, it helps it survive, can become more and more common. So that's the difference between natural selection and artificial selection. So what does he do? He goes around this big boat trip in the 1840s. He comes back and he writes The Origin of the Species. And this was published in 1859. One thing I want to note, though, you're not going to get asked on this, but it might be a good, like, if you ever do pub trivia, it might pop up there. He wrote this thing 20 years earlier. He wrote this in 1844. He did not publish it for 15 years. So he had this breakthrough thing that affects all life on Earth. This is arguably one of the biggest discoveries in mankind. And he never published it. The reason he waited was twofold. One, it's the 1800s. People are super religious. This goes against the face of God, right? No, God did things this way. Well, no, nature did. So the church would have been out to get him. And the church did actually attack him once he did publish it. And two, the only reason he published it was because other people had figured this out as well and were publishing. So he's like, I get, like, it's about to come out. I guess I might as well take credit for it. So he published it. So we use evolution when we mean changes in a group over time, cumulative changes over time. And again, natural selection is not evolution. It's what causes that evolution to happen. Okay, so again, there is two big things here. These are not the same thing. I really want to make that distinction. Natural selection leads to evolution. It does, but it is itself not evolution. So there was a lot of fluff in this one. The big thing here that you really needed to know was natural selection and evolution. How is evolution caused by natural selection? Okay, so we'll end that one there. We'll head to the next part here. I don't think today will take too long. Okay. So next part here is evidence of evolution. So he came up with a theory, but all science needs evidence. All claims need evidence. Cool, you come up with a cool theory, but like, why is it so accepted today? It is the most universally accepted theory. How come? So here's some of the supports. So the theory of evolution states that all organisms have descended from a single ancestor, which we kind of talked about, probably from, a single-celled organism. So his essay looks at how it might have happened, and he introduced some evidence. So here's how we know, or here's here's the evidence we have. We can look at the fossil record. We've talked already about how we know we can date stuff from the fossil records. We can use radioactive dating. We can look at the rocks around it. We can look at the composition of stuff around it, how deep it is, etc. We can compare the anatomy of old things with current things. We can compare how they develop as a baby. We can look at their DNA, and we can look at where they're located in the world. So we're going to go through all 5 of these points. These are the main 5 points, though. These are the broad categories as to why. So we're going to zoom in on each of these now. So the fossil record shows that most modern species resembled ancient species. If you guys remember when we, with a chicken and a T-Rex, for example, again, think about those character traits, hollow bones. Dinosaurs did have feathers, actually. I know Jurassic Park doesn't show that. We didn't know that. Like hollow bones, the beaks, how they walk, their skeletal structure, stuff like that. They resemble them. Some species have changed very little. The great white shark, alligators, crocodiles have remained largely the same for 400 million years. What do you call it? It's like a relicanth or something. It's like an ancient fish. We found an ancient fish in fossils. Let me load up a picture here. You probably have seen this. An image in new tab. This thing here, it's a coelacanth. So we found very well preserved parts of these in fossils, and we dated those fossils to be like, I don't know, like 200 million years old, 400 million years old, something like that. Super old. We caught one. We caught one 30 or 40 years ago in the ocean, and we've caught more since then. So they've changed. They're almost identical. When we look at their fossils, we look at them now. Some of those fossils had scale marks. They had the skeletons. They had like the eye sockets and stuff. They had the fins, and we can look at them now and they're the same. So some species don't change because they've been able to adapt. Like they've been able to survive perfectly fine. There's been no need for adaptations. Yeah. So with this fossil record, so basically Darwin looks at fossils as between species. So again, he's looking at a line here. I go from this animal to this animal to this animal, and he can link that with the fossil record. So we look at 2 major classes of traits. When we look at what's called a transitional fossil, this is that middleman one here. Again, think about a T-Rex and think about a chicken. They are descendants of each other. The chicken's a descendant of the T-Rex, but there was something in the middle there. Maybe like dinosaur like this, where it had wings, for example. It had a more pointed beak, for example. This would be our transitional fossil. And there can be more than one. In fact, there was probably many in between there. So we look at derived traits, which are those new ones, right? And we look at ancestral traits, which are those more primitive features. So that's the fossil record. What we can also do is we can look at their anatomy. I can look at the skeletons of modern animals and previous mammals, and I can see how similar are they. And not only can I see how similar are they, I can see how many traits are different. And then if there's a single trait that's different, there might only, there might not be any links. But if there's 2 traits that are different, 2 traits different between the chicken and the T-Rex, well, maybe there was 2 common ancestors then that were before it. So we can look at their anatomy. We look at homologous structures, AKA we look at similar structures that were inherited. If you're looking at these things here, you're looking at a bat You're looking at a human, they have some fairly similar traits, right? We have a wrist, a movable wrist. We have appendages that stretch out, for example. A horse does not have that, the fingers and toes, for example. But a cat, a bat, a human does. So evolution predicts that an organism's body parts are more likely to be modifications of ancestral parts than entirely new structures. So it's not that we just suddenly grew arms, it's that there was something with some type of an arm before, and we eventually got movable wrists or a movable elbow or a rotational shoulder. So when we look at this, we look at also vestigial structures. Sometimes things get reduced. You have one, every one of us does. Your appendix is useless. In fact, your appendix tries to kill you. It doesn't really have anything, right? So this is an example of a vestigial structure. It doesn't do anything for you anymore. It used to do something for us, maybe 1 million years ago in one of our Homo ancestors. But right now, for modern humans, even 20,000 years ago, it didn't really do much. So we lost a function for it. So an appendix is a vestigial structure, for example. So this is the third one here. We can look at, wait. No, we're still on 2, right? Sorry, we're still on 2. We look at analogous structures, which are things that are used for the same purpose and maybe superficially similar in construction, but are not inherited from a common ancestor. Basically, this is something that is similar to Darwin here. This is the fancy way of saying is, hey, these two things have the same traits, but they just evolve independently from each other. Both of them just naturally, there was just 2 places of the world where this animal got long necks. It doesn't mean that the giraffe and I don't know, the deer are closely related at all. It just means they both had advantages for it. Okay, here's the third one. We can look at the embryo of it. We can look at how these develop in the pre-birth stage. And we can also look at how it grows after it's born, right? Embryo is the egg. It's like the unborn child. The fourth one we can look at is their biochemistry, their DNA, right? We look at those nucleotides, how much of the DNA is similar. If you remember those, we had the chimpanzee, we had the human, and we had I think a gorilla DNA. And we looked at how similar those are. That's what that was. The more closely related, the greater the similarity. The more similar you are in your DNA, the more related you are. And so next we look at finally we look at geographic distributions, where they're located. So when we look at where they are around the world through biogeography, but basically we know we can usually figure out predictably, we used to have just one giant supercontinent, right? And then slowly it started branching out and pulling away through plate tectonics. We know this. So at a certain point, life was on some place, but then it eventually split up. So you have to look at migration. Look at humans, for example, in Africa, we learned when they migrated. We looked at our Homo sapiens when they migrated, for example. So that's how we're able to trace that back, is through the fossil record, and we're able to use that to figure out how closely something's linked. A Homo erectus, for example, found in Asia might not be that closely related to the first Homo species, because the first Homo species never left. Okay, so these are some types of adaptations. We've talked about this already, but an adaptation is a trait that's shaped by natural selection that increases that organism's reproductive success. This doesn't mean it's better at sex. This means it's more likely to survive. Remember, the goal of all life ever on Earth is to make babies. It's inbuilt into every species. So an adaptation means that this creature is more likely to survive and pass on its offspring. If it does that, it's a successful adaptation. So we look at fitness as a measure of the contribution this trait makes to the next generation. So let's go through these types of adaptations. What are some things that could make an animal more likely to survive? We've talked about a couple of them. One of them might be camouflage. Remember the butterfly? The other one is, bees. Bees are yellow, right? What color are wasps? Yellow. Yellow and black, just like a bee. The bee has a poisonous stinger, right? Like if you've been stung by a bee, you know it sucks. Some people obviously are definitely allergic. Bees evolved to be yellow as a warning sign. So bees evolved to be yellow as a warning sign to show other animals, don't eat me if you don't want to get a puffy nose. Wasps learned to, yellow wasps were left alone, right? Because other animals didn't want to bother them. Oh crap, that's a bee, that's poisonous. So yellow wasps use something called mimicry. It resembles another species. We see this all the time in snakes and bugs. So we have camouflage and mimicry. So not all adaptations, though, can be a good thing or a good thing for part of the time. So when we're going to look at the consequences here. So one, most of these adaptations, many of them start out as genetic accidents. That first giraffe that had a much taller neck, that was just something going wrong with the DNA transcription, right? That was just a mistake, a mutation. It just happened to be really good to help them survive. But what if you have a giraffe instead that was born with much shorter legs? Not that helpful to survive, right? It can't reach that stuff. It's going to starve to death. So not all features are necessarily adaptive. They might not help. They might hurt. As well, there's just some other things here. If we look at mammals, especially humans, we give birth at a really early developmental stage than other primates. You can get pregnant as early as 12, for example. And, human babies can't, it's not like a deer, right? If a deer has a baby, it walks around in a minute. Our kids can't walk till they're 12 months old, 16 months old, something like that. They can't take care of themselves. They're reliant on the mothers. That can be a dangerous adaptation. But this is a penalty we pay for other traits. So the reason we're so helpless as a kid is because we're born with a larger brain. The reason babies can't walk very well is because brains are heavy. The heads are big. It throws you off balance, right? You don't have the muscles for that yet to do it. Okay, we're going to go to our last section here. Like I said, this will be quick. This is the longest section, though. Okay. And so his theory came out in, he developed this in the 1840s. We are 180 years past that. How has new information, how has new discoveries been implemented? Because when he did this, he didn't have DNA, for example, right? DNA is pretty absolute. It's very accurate. And he didn't have it. We're able to learn a lot of stuff from that. Okay, so we're going to look at a couple things here. So population genetics. This is what we have Hardy and Weinberg, and we call this the Hardy-Weinberg principle. Basically, these two people showed evolution does not occur in a population unless it's called an allelic frequency are acted upon by forces that cause change. Alleles, we're going back to genes. It always goes back to genes. So basically, what they're saying here is that these allelic frequencies, if they're remaining constant, if they're the same, the population is in genetic equilibrium. Sharks, right? Sharks haven't changed for 400 years, 400 million years. They've been in equilibrium for 400 million years. If you're looking at the owls here, 1 in 3 are brown, 2 in 3 carry white. And if we go to the next generation, it's the exact same thing. So these are in equilibrium. So the Hardy-Weinberg principle is that when frequencies remain the same, then it's in equilibrium. They've introduced some math here. So just so you know, it is some math. We substitute stuff, but basically they were able to take this concept and put it down into a formula. They're able to use this to see how much a species is in equilibrium. So what they do is they take the amount of homozygous dominance. Let's think, what is that? That was fur color, right? So homozygous dominant, FF. We add on 2 times the amount of heterozygous. So that's this one here, right? And then I add on how many homozygous recessives there are. So if I add all these up, I should eventually get to 100% of the population. If I add everything up, I should get to 100% of the population, basically. If, though, I'm having a bunch of offspring, I'm having a bunch of homozygous dominant offspring. In fact, every offspring carries this gene. It's not in equilibrium, for example. Actually, no, I'm going to use that. We're going to say homozygous, heterozygous, sorry. And that's a lowercase. So for it to meet this, to be in genetic equilibrium, there's 5 things. There can't be any genetic drift. We're gonna look at what these are. So if you don't know what that is, that's fine. So to meet this, to be in genetic equilibrium, you have to have no genetic drift, no gene flow, no mutations. We know what that is. Mating has to be random. We know what that is. And there can't be any natural selection. We know what that is. That means all species are equally able to adapt and survive. So genetic drift. Genetic drift is when those allelic frequencies, right? This stuff here. So it's when it starts to change. It's when those frequencies start to change. If you guys remember those owls, right? From the next generation to the next generation, 1 out of 3 owls had that brown feathers. But if the next generation, if let's say we fast forward 100 years, and now 2 out of 3 of them have that brown fur, that is genetic drift. Those allele frequencies are changing. This, if we say that's recessive, for example, it's more common now. It has drifted. The frequencies have changed. So this is what's called genetic drift. Because these alleles are slowly increasing or decreasing over time, it's not constant, it's not the same proportion, it's going to drift. There is going to be a distinct difference between owls 100 years ago and owls 100 years in the future, based on this, for example. The smaller the population, the more pronounced this genetic drift is featured. The more obvious it is, the more change it does. In a big population, it's more stable. So this is still in genetic drift. We have something what's called a founder's effect. This is when a group of individuals with a different allele frequency than the original population becomes isolated. So think about the Galapagos Islands. If I have South America over here, eventually these islands broke off from the mainland, right? Australia broke off from the mainland. So now it's isolated. So let's say, for example, if I had 1 out of 3 of my owls over here were brown, but when the island broke off, 2 out of 3 of them were brown here. There's some different allele frequencies, right? And now it's become isolated. 1,000 years in the future, the owls on the island are going to look different than the owls on the mainland, because I just have a different frequency of it. Eventually, all the owls are going to be brown on the island. But maybe it'll still be really rare over here. So the founder effect basically states that when these alleles were infrequent in the original population, it might be common. So the owls on the island are more common now. And this happens when it's separated. There's something that happens that isolates it. Next, we have a bottleneck. If you guys don't know what a bottleneck is, like think about a beer ball. Do that, sure. Right, here's a bottleneck. Basically means I have all this stuff here that's flowing into it. Imagine if I'm going 6 lanes of traffic into 2 lanes. It's going to get to chaos around right here, right? Everything slows down around there. That's a bottleneck. So in genetic drifts, a bottleneck is when a population declines to a low level. It almost goes extinct, and then it comes back. The gene pool of the rebound population. So again, here's my population over time. It's slowly dying away, almost goes extinct, and boom. The rebound population, this stuff right here, is going to have decreased diversity. It's going to be more consistent traits. If you remember, we've seen this before. We humans at one point were at this point. When there was an ice age, almost every human alive died. There was 5,000 humans left in the world. Eventually, we're 8 billion now, but we carry a lot of those same. We're pretty constant in our genes. I know that sounds silly because we have black people, we have white people, we have tall people and short people, but we're quite consistent in our genes. So the next thing, so this has all been just what genetic drift is. These are all examples of genetic drift. The next one we're looking at now is gene flow. What does that mean? When we have a population that's in that equilibrium and it has no gene flow, it's what we call a closed system. Nothing's changing. However, sometimes things move. You guys have probably all seen it. Does anyone out here ever go to like a lake commonly? You probably see, or camping, you probably see a sign that says clean your boat out, right? Bring no water in your boat. Or if you go to Saskatoon, you'll see signs like don't bring any like timber wood into Moose Jaw or something. They want to make sure there's no cross-contamination. They don't want unnatural organisms going in it. So the reason for that is, if I bring a certain type of fish, it comes along my boat, I drop it in Fish and Lake, it's not meant to be there. Maybe it overwhelms the current ecosystem, for example. I have introduced a change into it. It's no longer a closed system. I'm introducing new things into it. So it could create some genetic variation, for example, because maybe this only targets really slow fish. So maybe this new fish I brought is only eating all the slow fish that's in Fish and Lake, but all the fast ones are surviving, for example. Now, fast forward 1 million years, maybe now I have a new species of really fast fish in there. So that's the difference between a closed system and an open system. Closed system, nothing new is happening in there. Nothing's causing issues. But if there's something, some event, some movement, usually movement, like literally of a population, that could affect it. This doesn't mean I introduce a new predator. It could mean that the population itself moves. Maybe giraffes moved from places with really tall trees to really short trees. That could change it too. So that's two. The third one is non-random mating. Basically, it just needs to be random, right? Like it can't be like pugs where I can forcibly destroy the face of a pug in 100 years. It has to just be in nature randomly. The fourth one here are mutations. We know what those are. It's random. Most features of animals started out as a mutation. They just happen to be helpful. Again, most mutations are harmful. Most are. But some can become beneficial and more common. This is almost certainly, again, how we got really tall-necked giraffes. It started out as a mutation, and then the tall giraffe necks were just better at surviving. Really common, no, so not, I'm sorry, a really rare but well-known mutation is albinism. We see this in not just humans, we see it in sharks, fish, rabbits, deer, moose, etc. You can find albino animals, for example. That is a mutation, and for most of them, it's very harmful, right? Because now you've taken off their natural camouflage. A white moose is very much easier to see than a brown moose. Okay, so we have three different charts here that you will probably have to reference at some point during your final. So there's three types of natural selection. There's not just one. Remember, natural selection is where the individuals that are most likely to survive and pass on their own offspring do. So we're going to look at all three of these. The first one, stabilizing selection gets rid of extreme expressions of a trait when the average expression leads to higher fitness. What does that mean? It gets rid of the extreme stuff. So if I have an original population, that this dashed line, and then this fully greened out one is the population after selection, after time, if it's been a closed system. This would be, actually a good example of this is, let me clarify, wild dogs. Wild canines are very good. It's a very good example of this. Before human like domestication and like forced breeding, artificial breeding, dogs looked quite similar. There was quite a good consistency with it. The next one is directional selectness. It creates a more extreme version. An example here would be your giraffe. Giraffes have longer necks now. All giraffes have longer necks because the ones with really short necks died. They couldn't reproduce. So now your shortest giraffe is still taller than many previous giraffes. Okay, and our next one here is disruptive selection. This removes the ones with the average traits, but it retains individuals expressing extreme traits. So what I'm trying to think, what would be a good example of this one here? Yeah, sure. Let's go with like squirrels. Think about squirrels, for example. I might either have a super short tail or a really long tail. The short tail is helpful when you're running away. There's less of you to grab from a predator, right? The long tail is really helpful for animals trying to balance on like treetops and stuff through heavy winds. It can be used as like a way to make them appear bigger than they are. But maybe the ones with medium tails kind of got the worst. They didn't get a tail big enough to help them, but they got a tail that's still grabbable by predators. So the ones with medium tails die out. And now what I have is I have either short-tailed squirrels or long-tailed squirrels. There are no medium ones. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm kind of making that up, but I hope that helps drive home an example. Okay, so one other thing as well is something called sexual selection. Peacocks. Most people have been to a zoo. Peacocks are really colorful, right? They have the really bright green or turquoise feathers. They have those beautiful tails. Those are ways for them to help attract a mate. So even though it doesn't help them survive, in fact, if they're being that colorful, it probably hurts them. They're easier to see, but it might help them get a mate much more than a more camouflaged peacock. So that means that, well, actually, this is a sexual selection. It increases their likelihood to pass on their genes. Doesn't increase their likelihood to survive. Well, it might not anyways, but they're still passing it on more likely than the other ones. So remember, natural selection is surviving and passing on genes. So sexual selection is really common in populations where males and females look really different. We see this a lot in birds, for example. And again, it might make mating more successful, but it might reduce the odds of survival. So think about a peacock, right? In the wild, a peacock is really easy to see, but it's able to reproduce. It's able to get a mate much easier. Okay. So next, we're going to look at reproductive isolation. This is actually going to be fairly important. The last two finals I've seen have had a question on this. They literally will give you a map and have you, and you'll see a map in the next one, and have you like deduce some stuff from it. So when we look at something called speciation, this is when a population of sexually reproducing organisms changes so much that it can no longer produce fertile offspring with other populations. Remember, this is when you make a new species. A new species is when it's so different, you can't have kids anymore, okay? But just because animals look really different doesn't mean they're not genetically viable to make fertile offspring. So we have two different kinds of these. We call this reproductive isolation. We have pre-zygotic and post-zygotic. Pre-zygotic happens before fertilization occurs. So this makes fertilization, this prevents reproduction by making fertilization unlikely. Even if these two things have sex, they cannot have a kid. Post-zygotic is, there is fertilization, but it remains infertile. We've looked at this before. This is our example, the liger. Right? It's a real thing. A liger is a thing. It exists. There's hundreds of them in the world, but they can't have kids. So they're not a species. So they undergo what's called post-zygotic isolated mechanisms. They can be created, but they sure as heck can't make themselves. So for speciation to occur, your populations have to diverge. They have to split up. And then they have to reproduce isolated. And we have two different kinds of these, allopatric and sympatric. Allopatric is when we have a physical barrier. A physical barrier. And this is the most common thing that changes us to create new species. Think about South America again, right? I have my islands here. There's a physical barrier. There's a giant sea of water. It broke away from the island. It floated out to sea, right? Or think about it this way. So this is South America. Another way to think about it is, what happens if I have a really big sea up here, but the water levels recede, and now I'm left with a bunch of land here. So now I have two pools of smaller water. If I give it a million years, I might get two different types of fish in here. So you might get two different kinds of fish over enough years. That's a physical barrier, and it is the most common. So if allopatric is physical, sympatric is without physical. They remain in close proximity. So this would be a good example of this is the homogeneous, all the different species there. We've already established 4 of these existed at one time, living on the same continent. So next we also have adaptive radiation. So this is when we have a large number of species arise from a single common ancestor. Erase that. This is what follows usually those large-scale extinction events, or when I create a new habitat. Okay, so this is when I got one precursor species and it creates a whole bunch more. It's not just I went from Homo erectus to Homo sapien. It would be I went from this thing to 5 different new species, right? That's the difference between adaptive radiation and just regular adaptations. And then we have what's called coevolution. This is when species evolve so close, they influence each other. They influence each other. They can have mutual benefits. So we think about oh no, where's my pen? So we think about mutualism, both species benefit. We have bees and wasps. They benefit from each other. Wasps benefit from bee because they're yellow and they look similar, and bees are poisonous. Things know not to eat bees, not to piss off bees. Bees benefit from wasps because wasps are assholes and they'll try and attack you. They're very aggressive, right? So either way, you got 2 little small yellow things that you're kind of scared of. They both benefit from that fear. Or we get what's called a parasitic or predatory relationship. You might have seen those instances where, sure. Maybe you have like a bird's nest, right? And then, so maybe you have, I'm just drawing some ink really quick. Here we go. So we might have what's called a predatory relationship, which is some birds lay eggs, and then maybe you'll get a snake that kind of crawls up, lays its own egg in here, and then the bird takes care of it. And then eventually, you know, that snake eats the other bird's eggs, for example, right? Maybe these eggs have evolved to be, let's go to the robin. They're blue eggs. Most of us have seen a robin eggshell before, right? A very distinct, beautiful blue. Maybe there's birds that have shell that are that color. Well, the snakes that do that, that prey on this bird, that lay their eggs and the bird raises that egg for them, well, the ones with red shells aren't going to do well, right? The ones with blue shells are going to do more well. So they both evolve together in what's called a co-evolutionary arms race. They don't help each other, but they evolve based on each other. And yeah, just because you get traits that are similar doesn't mean that they're from one another. This is convergent evolution, okay? It's just passing on traits that are benefited in certain environments. It just so happens there's two animals that are living in similar environments. You think about a mole, there's two different kinds here, right? One of these, that they're not really genetically related. They're not very related species. They just happen to live underground and have to dig through a bunch of dirt. Okay. Yeah, actually, this one's pretty fortunate. This gets asked a lot. So this rate of speciation, if it involves in small gradual steps, it is gradualism. So if you're looking at this one over here, this one on the right, this is the gradual model. I have a species that slowly evolve in small steps, right? Long neck to a longer neck to a longer neck. Shorter face to a shorter face to a shorter face. Or I have punctured equilibrium, which is rapid. Lots of change cause rapid speciation over a short period of time. So gradual is just as it sounds. It's gradual, it's taking its time. That's the easiest way to remember which one's which, because punctuated is not gradual, it's very instant. Okay. And that is it. We're done. We're not learning anything new. It's over. So here's what today is going to bring us. So we're not going to learn anything new. We've gone through a lot. Like I said, I apologize for having to go so quick here at the end, but we needed to fit it in. So what the plan is on Monday and Tuesday, those are review days. Your exam is on the afternoon of the 29th at 12:30. Please show up early if you can, so that you can start writing them. So you can get a drink, go to the bathroom, have a smoke, do whatever before that time starts. So that'll happen then. So we have 2 days where we're going to be reviewing stuff. You'll look at some old final exams. So what today is, it's time to finish up this unit, but also we're going to start a little bit of review for it as well. So here's what's going to happen. There's two things you need to do to start. One, I've opened up a quiz here to do. So one is go in the LMS, do the quiz. The next part is you go to the review section here. Oh, you don't, this is not an assignment, sorry. Don't worry about that. This is not an assignment. You can go to the study materials. I have this printed out for you. There is here we go, biology final exam review. I put the date wrong, it says 2023, it's supposed to be 2024. But there is a review on here. And all it is, is a checklist of all the stuff, because there's a lot of stuff. I want you to go through this list and categorize it. Evolution. I think I know a lot about evolution. I'm good there. What the heck is a cladogram? I don't know. I should probably spend my time there. This is, I think I know what this is, but I'm not sure. But maybe you look at, I don't know, the origin of life, and you're like, I don't know. I wasn't there that day. I didn't pay attention. I don't remember it. I definitely need to study this. So it's all the stuff that we've gone through. And I just want you to go into it, and I want you to list what it is you know, what it is you don't know, what it is you're not sure of. And that gives you a map as to, I know where I need to focus my time. Everyone's going to be different with this. The next thing as well is, if you finish that, I have some sample questions here that you're able to try out. We will look at a more proper review on Monday and Tuesday, but I've just put some sample test questions here that I want you guys to try. And use anything at your disposal. Use your textbook and stuff. Use your notes. On Tuesday, we'll do it without your notes, but for now you can. So quick reminder, do the quiz on the LMS. Once you're done with that, go to the study materials, get this document, and then just go through it. As well, if you are missing any work, you are on your last chance to hand that in. If you want to hand something in, it needs to be in by the 28th. It cannot come later than that. Like, I have to submit marks after that. So get it in if you're missing it. Okay, does anyone have any questions?